guys.
There's a seat over here if anyone wants it.
Or you need to sit on the stairs, that's fine too.
There's technically a seat right here too.
Yeah, but the tripod's
All right.
Any of this?
You want to sit on your side over there? Just don't sit in front of the board.
All right, let's go ahead and start it, and let's pray because we want this to go well and we need to learn something. So let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the students and their dedication to doing well in the final. I pray you help today to be instructive and helpful, and that they would be able to be prepared as well as possible for their exam. In your name, amen. All right, so it's a good idea if you don't have notes out or something to write on to get that out. Hopefully you have a good idea of what's on the exam. And the goal for today is for it to be interactive, so we will ask questions. So raise your hand, although participation points are not involved anymore, we still appreciate your involvement and reassurance that we are good teachers and that you know stuff. All right, so first we're going to start out talking about chapter 12, which is the first chapter from the unit, the last unit that we covered. For chapter 12, we specifically need to know a few things. We need to know about imagery and rhythm. So can someone remind all of us what imagery is? Can you just put in your own words. What is imagery in our language? What's the goal of imagery, using imagery?
Using words to create a picture.
Right, so the word image is in it. Hopefully that'll help you. So you're trying to create a picture for us so that we can see what you're speaking. And we do this in two different ways. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and ask, do any of you remember two different ways specifically that we do this? What kinds of things? You learn this in literature class all the time. One of them is similes, which can someone remind me what a simile is?
It's using like or as.
Like or as. So I typically just use examples from scripture. They're all in scripture, but it talks about that it compares the kingdom of heaven in the book of Matthew, and it says it's like a hidden treasure in a field. So it's trying to create the picture for us. It's like a hidden treasure in a field that when someone figures out it's there, they go and they dig in the ground until they get that treasure out. And it's comparing the kingdom of heaven to treasure buried. All right, so that's a simile. And that creates a mental picture. Now the other type is, does someone know? Yes. Metaphor. What is a metaphor? Can someone tell me what a metaphor is? Not a simile, so there's something excluded. Yeah. In the brain. Yes.
It's a comparison that does not use like.
All right. So can someone maybe give me an example of a comparison that doesn't use like or as? Is it too late on a Friday? I'll give you an example. It's too late on a Friday. I apologize for that. Again, I just think of scripture examples. Psalm 23, really easy. The Lord is my shepherd. It's comparing the Lord to a shepherd and how he cares for his sheep, but it's not using like or as. That is a metaphor. And both of those are types of what we just said, those are imagery. Okay. Some of you are listening. I'm sure all of you are listening. All right, the second type, we have imagery and then we have rhythm. And there are 4 different devices we use. Again, you probably learned this in literature class. There are 4 different types we use to give a sense of rhythm. There is parallelism. And can someone remind me what parallelism is? Yes.
Similar word structure.
So similar word structure. And think of wedding vows, right? Where they say, I so-and-so take you so-and-so to be my lawfully wedded wife or husband, depending on your gender. And so there's a lot of parallelism there. And especially the part where it talks about for richer, for poor, for better, for worse, those parallel structures. All right, so that's parallelism. Secondly, repetition. Parallelism, repetition. I might have just used repetition. All right, so what is repetition? It's very self-explanatory. You repeat what you said again. And by repeating, you're hoping that it'll aid someone in remembering it. Repetition. I don't know if you remember this in chapel. Before Thanksgiving break, Dr. Crockett, I think, talked about Psalm 136. And how it has a phrase in it, for his steadfast love endures forever, and every verse has that phrase in it. It says it over and over and over, and that's a rhythmic device to help us remember that God's steadfast love endures forever. It says the same thing over and over and over. Go ahead, come on in. All right, alliteration. Can someone remind me what alliteration is? What's alliteration? Yes. Right, so if I can get this out, she sells seashells by the seashore. A lot of S's. So every word, or not every word, but many of the words start with the same letter. That's the idea there. And then antithesis. Antithesis, so it's the idea of a bit of contrast. Think of, if you're a literary buff, think of the beginning of The Tale of Two Cities. It talks about it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. So there's a comparison and a contrast going on there. That's the idea of antithesis. All right, secondly, or not secondly, after imagery and rhythm, there's one other thing you need to know from chapter 12 specifically. You need to know about connotative language and denotative language. So can someone tell me what connotative language is? Connotative language, you remember?
Language that has a strong feeling or image associated with it.
Right, so it's not a strict definition that we find in the dictionary, it has feeling to it. And then denotative then obviously is the opposite of that. It's like the definition you would find in Webster's dictionary. So you need to think specifically, let me give you an example first of it. So let's talk about if we use the word moolah to describe money, would that be connotative or denotative?
Connotative.
Connotative, say it with more confidence. Connotative.
Connotative.
You don't typically look up moolah in Webster's dictionary, all right? So keep that in mind. Connotative, think context. Context is also a connotative. Denotative, we would maybe just use the word money. So you need to think specifically, when would it be best to use connotative and denotative language? You'll have to apply that kind of knowledge in your test. So think specifically in a persuasive speech, what kind of words you might use more if you're trying to build your pathos. What do you think? This is more of a thinking question. What kind of language you would use, connotative or denotative, if you're trying to build that emotional appeal? Connotative, right? Because you're trying to move us with your words. You're trying to use the context that you created. All right, now Ms. Talbert's going to cover the next chapter.
Okay, so chapter 16, types of persuasive speaking, and I'm going to put a couple things up on the board because there's some listing that you're going to have to do, and I want you to have these categories really cemented straight in your mind so that when you see it on the test, you're not like, whoa, I have no idea what they're after. So I'm going to be very specific about what I put up here. Okay, when we talk about types of persuasive speaking. Types of persuasive speaking, there are two main types. Two different things that we might be trying to get the audience to do. Who remembers what they are? Somebody raise your hand. Real quickly. Yeah.
Convince and actuate.
Yes, to convince and to actuate. Exactly. So that's what this is talking about. Types of persuasive speaking. One of them is to convince, and one of them is to actuate. What's the other word for actuate? Just say it. What's the other word for actuate? Motivate. Motivate. Yes. Maybe that wasn't something that we really hammered, but if you see it, that's what it means. Actuate and motivate, same thing. What's the big difference between to convince and to actuate? Yeah.
So convince, you're just trying to change their way of thinking. To activate, they already have your way of thinking, but you're trying to get them to do something.
Yeah, exactly. So think convince, I'm trying to change their mind. I want them to think something different. Actuate, I want them to act. Or I'm trying to motivate them to get up out of their seat and go do something. Go give blood, or go exercise, or eat more healthy foods, or whatever it is. So that's the difference between these two. The next thing that you need to really know really well is the types of propositions. What's a proposition? Really quickly, somebody? Yeah.
Basically a thesis.
Yeah, it's the thesis for your persuasive speech. So there's 3 types of propositions, and what are those? Yeah. Okay, that's an organizational pattern.
Which we'll get to, so you're ahead.
All the way in the back there.
Fact, policy, and value.
Good, okay, we've got, I'm gonna switch up the order, but you're exactly right. Policy, value, and fact. These are the three kinds of propositions. So if you see on the test, what's the type of proposition that, you know it's one of these three. If you see, what's the type of persuasive speaking that, you know it's one of these two, okay? So, somebody tell me, who hasn't talked yet, how do we recognize a proposition of policy? What are the main components there?
It has the word should.
Yeah, has the word should, and there's an agency, right? So you're wanting somebody to change the way things are. So, if I were doing a speech to actuate, I might say, you should study for your final exam. Because I want you to act, I want you to do something, but that would be policy because I'm trying to get someone to do something specific, and I use the word should. Or, if it were to convince, I might say, Bob Jones University should cancel final exams, right? What about value? What's the key with value? Come on in. Try to find Okay. Stay with me because we don't have too much time. So value. What are the key components with value? What are we looking for?
Benefit? Beneficial.
Okay, beneficial would be a word that we might look for, yep. We're looking for some evaluative term, right? So some kind of adjective that we're assigning worth to something. So if I say that Miss Pennington is beautiful, I'm assigning a certain kind of worth to her, right? That would be a value statement. She is beautiful. Or I might say she is smart and brilliant and very kind. I'm assigning worth. I'm making value statements about those things. So you're looking for that kind of word, something like beneficial, harmful, advantageous. Fact, what is a proposition of fact? What are you looking for? True. Somebody raise your hand and, yeah.
Solid evidence.
Yeah, okay. Now with all of these, we want to use solid evidence to prove our point, right?
Or using more factual evidence to like maybe concrete.
Okay, yes.
The logos.
Mm-hmm. And you're gonna use, I think I know what you're saying. You're gonna use logos for any of these kinds of propositions. But a proposition of fact is just gonna be like a cut and dry statement, and you're trying to show that the evidence for that statement disproves the evidence against that statement. For instance, if I say that global warming does not exist, I'm making a statement, and then I'm going to show you that I have more evidence for that statement than somebody would have who came along and said, no, it does exist. Does that make sense? So basically, if you don't see that evaluative term, and it's not you should, or Bob Jones should, or the government should, then it's probably a fact proposition. Okay, what I want to do is give you a taste of what you are going to have to do on the final exam. So I have an activity that we're just going to do together. And it's just a really simple, this is not very high tech, but can you turn your brightness down? Oh, perfect. Okay, so you're just going to have to be able to identify different kinds of propositions. So if you see this one, still can't see very well.
Still can't see that.
We'll get this. Okay, can you see that?
No.
Okay. The U.S. should further reduce nuclear offensive weapons. What kind of proposition?
Policy.
Policy, because you've got that word should right there. Very clear. The Electoral College is the best means of electing the President of the United States.
Fact.
Value, because you've got that word.
Best.
Best. Good. The American Association of Psychology and pharmaceutical companies have conspired together to overprescribe Ritalin. Fact. Good. The death penalty is the best means of deterring murder. Value, because we've got the best going on. Government gun control is wrong. Wait, what? Value, because we've got that word wrong, right? That's definitely a value term, right and wrong. Now, if we said government gun control is against the Constitution or illegal, that's fact, right? Because we're not saying whether it's good or bad, we're just saying either it is in the Constitution or it isn't in the Constitution. So then it becomes a proposition of fact. It can get a little bit tricky. Genetically engineered foods are harmful to our health. Value.
So that has any adjective at all, it becomes value?
Good question. If it has an adjective like that, it could be a hybrid. Like in my class, we talked about the word effective and how effective, depending on how you're going to define that, it might be value or fact. Don't sweat those ones. Don't worry too much about them. If you think it through and if you say, I think it sounds like fact or I think it sounds like value, go with that. But pretty much, if you see a word that you think is an evaluative term, then yeah, go with value. And if it doesn't have one, then you pretty much know that it's fact. Does that make sense? So yeah, there are some that are hybrids, but don't stress about those for the final exam. Okay, O.J. Simpson murdered his wife.
Fact.
Fact. Good. So we skipped this one. U.S. should abolish the Electoral College.
Policy.
Policy.
This is very similar to what you'll do on the test.
Procrastination is a psychological disorder. That would be fact.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. So make sure you know those. Make sure you can recognize these that when they're asking for these three things, and please don't leave any of those blank. Even if you're guessing, you know it's like
You
one
know
out
it's
these
one of the three options, so instead of putting nothing, and it kills us
Kills us.
mentally, spiritually, and physically. When you leave those blank.
It does.
Okay, we're going to talk about now chapter 17, and this is a lot of the material on reasoning. So first let me review what this looks like. Alright, so we know that there are three types of persuasive proofs or appeals that we are going to use in our speeches. Do you remember what those are? We're trying to appeal to people? Yes, good. So ethos, pathos, and logos, or if you say pathos, that's fine too. We're all God's children. Alright, so we have, I talked about this in my class, I don't know if all the teachers talked about it, but they work all together like a house. And I don't know if your teachers use this illustration, but I'm going to use it. So in every good house, there are three elements that are really important, and I'm sure there's more than that, but we're just trying to simplify it. So typically the foundation of the house, right? The foundation of the house is pretty important. If you don't have a solid foundation, you can't really build a house effectively. And we're comparing that to the ethos. Can someone remind me what the ethos is? What is ethos?
Is it not personal?
It's your personal appeal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's your personal appeal. So it's what makes you credible or trustworthy. And we talked about different ways that you do this: eye contact, trying to connect them with your story, your reputation, right? All those things go into ethos. And then we talked about that next we have all the structural elements, right? So the walls and all that great stuff. You can tell I don't work in construction. All right, and we call that logos, or the logical appeal, right? So our ways of reasoning with them logically, the way we arrange our arguments and all of that is called logos. And then third of all, if you're wanting to sell your house, especially in today's market, you're going to have decorations. So there's paint on the wall, there are paintings, there are couches. That's my couch. And all sorts of furniture. And all those things make the house more attractive to you and make it easier to sell the house. And we're comparing that to your pathos or pathos, however you prefer. And those are our emotional appeals, right? So we're trying to emotionally appeal to you. So it might be a really sad story about someone who's very underprivileged and vulnerable and how they suffer from something. We're trying to convince you that something should be done about it. So that they work all together. And those are the three different, we call them persuasive proofs, the way you're trying to prove yourself. So keep that in mind. It's important that you know that label, the persuasive proofs. Yeah.
You need to know the likability, competence, and character are three components of ethos.
You need to understand that those go in ethos. Exactly. Good. So credibility, trustworthiness, those things build your ethos. And then logos is your logical reasoning, pathos or pathos is your emotional appeal. Alright, so let's go through each of these. We kind of already talked about ethos a little bit more. Let's talk about pathos or pathos, whichever you prefer, and let's make sure that you particularly understand the different types of propaganda. We talked about a lot of different types, so I'm going to name them and see if you guys can help me fill in the blank what the definition is for them. Name calling. Can someone remind me what name calling is? It might be what it sounds like. Maybe.
Giving someone a label that has connotative meaning attached to it, like, for example, calling someone a Nazi.
Okay.
That creates a very strong connotative
Negative
image
feeling.
in
Right.
In your audience's mind.
Okay, so you're trying to create a negative opinion. You're trying to attach to a person by calling them a name. So calling another politician a Hitler would not be something that's favorable. It's negative, name calling. Card stacking. Yes, in fact.
False withholding.
Okay, so you're trying to deliberately deceive the evidence. You might skew the results, or you might omit things, leave things out that would prove contrary to your argument. So you're skewing the results. We talked about, well, in my class, we talked about thinking of a lawyer in an old movie where he's deliberately deceiving the evidence to convict someone who's really innocent. And then glittering generalities, what's that? Remember? Glittering generalities. Yeah.
Like when Ronald Reagan would say something like freedom fighters, it's generalizing things but making them sound nice and memorable.
So you're trying to attach a positive word, a virtue word, to someone. So that's a great example. Ronald Reagan called a bunch of people in an oppressive country who rose up against the government, he called them freedom fighters. So you use that word, those two words, freedom fighters, to create that virtuous kind of label for them. And then this is in contrast a little bit. It's similar to but different from transfer. What is transfer? I think I just heard it. So you're trying to transfer a picture, or you're trying to transfer an idea or a value, or trying to attach it to a person. So think of that politician. This isn't too far removed from us, but a politician standing in front of an American flag, or he's standing with his family, and he's playing with his kids, and everyone thinks, oh, he's such a great father. Okay, so we're trying to attach that value of being a family man to him. And that's transfer. Plain folk, what's that? Kind of what it sounds like. So you're trying to make, what do you think? Yeah.
It's like a general appeal. Puts them on the same level as everyone else.
Right, so think of a politician with his sleeves rolled up, and he's sitting at a table, and maybe Waffle House or something across from some construction workers, and he's talking to them. That was a bit of stereotyping, I apologize. Alright, and then testimonial, what's that? What's testimonial?
Basically someone famous, but not specifically in the field they're talking about, proving a certain action.
Right, so I always laugh right after the Olympics, summer or winter. Subway comes out with all these commercials of athletes who just love their sandwiches because they want a gold medal. They are not sandwich experts. They are athletes. Alright, maybe they're famous eaters. Maybe that's the connection. Alright, bandwagon. What is bandwagon? Bandwagon. Do you know what bandwagon is?
Setting up a logical foundation on why to do something.
So remember we talked about if you're going to use bandwagon effectively, you have to have a logical argument that says everyone is doing this because of these logical reasons. You're not just going to say, everyone's doing it, you should do it. And everyone's mom says, if all your friends jumped off a cliff, would you do it too? And some children say yes. Alright, and then those are the propaganda techniques. Yes, sir.
Excuse me, how do you distinguish between transfer and glittering generality?
Right, good question. So remember with glittering generalities, you're trying to attach a word, a specific word, like freedom, to someone. Transfer, you're trying to attach an ideal or a value. So with the politician, we talked about the value of him. He is a family man. And you're trying to attach that to him. Does that make sense? Okay, good. Good, that's important that you know the difference between them. Alright, now we talked about ethos, pathos, and pathos, and now we're going to talk a little bit about logos. And we're going to talk about the different reasoning strategies. So they're basically two big ones, right? There's deduction and induction. Someone remind me, what kind of statements do you go from in deduction? From what size to what size? You do?
I think it's from the general idea to a specific conclusion.
Good, so it's a universal type statement to a specific statement. So think of a V, if that helps you. And then induction is the opposite, right? And that is what? Going from a specific statements to more general conclusions. Think of a TV. And we digress. Okay, so that is induction, and there are different types of this. So let's first of all think of, with deduction, we think of, I'll give this example. So sometimes when we approach situations in our life, we can come to the correct perspective, but it's usually because we come with the lens on of a statement about God. So something like God is good. So because I believe God is good, every time I get up late and I miss my alarm clock, or I sit through my alarm clock and I don't get breakfast and I miss my quiz for my first class, every time I do that, I'm doing that through the lens of the fact that God is good. So I come from a universal statement and then I specifically see how that's illustrated. Sorry. Because she can do all these specific things, then therefore I can conclude that she is indeed a human being. And that is generalization. And then secondly, you have causal sequential. Does someone remember what causal sequential? Well, you know what? I'm just going to tell you because we have time for me to ask. Causal sequential. So think cause is in the word causal. So you're trying to look and you're trying to conclude. So let's say, I'll give you a statement. David got beat up by a bully at school. The next day, David had bruises all over his body. Well, I can logically conclude that it probably came from the bully, right? Because that happened before he had the bruises all over his body. So that is the idea of causal sequential. Analogy. If I studied for my first test and I did well, and if I studied for my second test and I did well, then if I studied for my final, I will probably do well on the test. That's the idea of analogy. I'm comparing similar things and I'm making some statement about something else because of those similar things. And then, lastly, for induction, sign. All right, so how do we know typically if the weather is bad? So if there was just a tornado recently. How do we know there's a tornado? We look outside and we see, oh, the sky is incredibly dark. And we see wind blowing cats off of sidewalks. And we see tree limbs falling down on students. And those kinds of things. And therefore we know, there might be a tornado. So sign is the idea that you're looking at all these specific instances and then you conclude, if all these things are happening, we can maybe conclude this bigger thing is happening. Causal sequential is saying, this happened and this happened, therefore they're connected. So you're trying to show that there's a relationship between the two. Yes?
On the test, is it going to be matching? Is it going to give you like a sentence like you just said? You said a tornado is happening, you see all these things happening, and that means a sign. Will it be like that? Where
There'll be examples, and I believe
You'll be given examples of reasoning, and you'll have to say, this is the kind of reasoning it is, and it either is valid or it's invalid.
which we'll talk about.
So you'll
in a
have to
second.
actually think about it.
Okay, so all of those were inductive, causal, sequential, generalization, analogy, and sign. Those are all inductive ways of reasoning. Now, Ms. Talbot just said you're going to need to identify whether something is valid or invalid. Okay, so valid means it's true, right? So you want to make sure, is that logically something that's sound? You have to watch out for fallacies, which Ms. Talbot will talk about in a little bit. You have to make sure logically that you can connect the dots, that it isn't assuming things and those kinds of things. So you will have to be able to identify, no, this is not reasoning well, or yes, this is good reasoning. Yes.
if there are no fallacies, you can just say it's valid.
I'm sorry, what? If there is,
If there are no fallacies, can you just say it's valid?
I mean, not necessarily. It'll just be a statement, and you'll have to decide whether there's a fallacy or not.
right, it's not gonna give you a list of fallacies to choose from. You'll just have to say, is this valid or invalid? Good question. Yes.
Are we evaluating soundness and validity or
Validity only, I'm pretty sure. It'll say something like, this is deductive and valid, or is it deductive and invalid? and you just have to choose between the two.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
But you gotta give an example of that. That's right.
I think that's all. So Ms. Thomas can talk about fallacies now.
Yes.
With the valid and invalid, are we discussing, is that including whether it's true or not? Because I know that something can be logically valid without being.
Right. You won't have to really mess with that. Yeah. All right, so fallacies, and these really kind of fit into the grid of when we're talking about the different kinds of reasoning, because several of the fallacies have to do specifically with kinds of reasoning. So, she talked about generalization being one of them, and I'm just gonna write because I'm very visual. So, generalization is basically the same thing as induction. What's something we have to be really careful about when we're taking a bunch of specifics to make a broad conclusion? What do we have to be careful that we don't do? Yeah, a hasty generalization. Which basically means we don't have a good sample size, right? I say that Mary and Rebecca and Jesse are all in my speech class. So, one of my speech classes. So, therefore, everyone in this room must be in one of my speech classes, right? I took a really bad sample. I took 3 people in the room that were sitting next to each other. So, I came to a generalization too hastily.
Or extreme examples.
Or extreme
Like,
examples.
both of you pick the most awkward homeschoolers, and you say, because these, 1 or 2 people, because we're homeschooled, it means all homeschoolers are weird.
Right.
So,
Not
all
extreme
homeschoolers are like
examples.
us. So, don't judge all homeschoolers based on that.
All right, with
Improper
sequential or causal reasoning, did I spell it right? What do we have to be careful about for that? There's a fallacy connected with this. Does anyone know what it is? Yeah.
Applying the wrong cause to the wrong effect, like saying this causes this when they're completely unrelated.
Okay, and what is it called?
Post hoc.
Yes, this is called post hoc, which basically just means 2 things happened, and whichever one happened first, I say it was the cause. So, I broke a mirror this morning, and then I had a car crash, so that broken mirror caused the car crash because it was bad luck and whatever. Okay, that would be post hoc. Or if you say that, say what? John, okay, so, yeah, John broke a dish. So his mom was upset, and then the next day, John had a broken arm. So therefore, his mom must have caused the broken arm because what happened? No, okay, there are lots of other factors, right, that we need to consider. So that's post hoc, that's fallacy. We're not gonna go through every single one of these because we don't have time. But what are some of the other fallacies? There's red herring, which just basically means you change topics. You talk about something that doesn't have anything to do with anything. Let's see here, slippery slope. What is slippery slope? Yeah.
Assuming the steps 1, 2, and 3 led to X, Y, Z.
Yeah, if you take steps 1, 2, and 3, then you will take steps 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And that's just not necessarily true, right? So that's slippery slope. I'm not going to keep going on those because we need to move on, but you know where to find the fallacies in your textbook. So know those and be able to recognize them.
Alright, we're gonna talk now about factors of attention. This is some review stuff you're gonna need to know. Factors of attention, yes, those are coming back to haunt you. Alright, factors of attention. There are different ones, there are 9 different ones. And we'll just pick a few of them, or do you think that's one? Well, no, I'll give you a lot of time for that. I'll just repeat. Okay, so make sure you know all these, but here are a few. So novelty of size, novelty of contrast. What does that mean? For novelty, what is novelty? So something that's unique or unexpected, it's new. So we talked about this before, but we talked about the Eiffel Tower. I wouldn't be able to say the Eiffel Tower is tall, and I could maybe give you the exact measurements. That wouldn't be necessarily something new to you, although maybe you didn't know the exact numbers. You knew it was tall, but if I compared it to maybe it's as tall as something is, like a river is long, that we're very familiar with, or something like that. That would be a way of illustrating it in a new way that's unexpected to you. Secondly, movement. Movement, and And this is the idea that you are connecting all the pieces together and you have a sense of you're going somewhere. There's like a storyline, almost like a plot line, that you're moving in a direction and you don't get sidetracked and you sense a momentum to what you're saying. So this could be done by, I like to illustrate this with music. Music is a lot of little moments. It's one piece of music, and everything builds and connects and climaxes, and then it will resolve and end. So it has a sense of direction, it's moving places, it doesn't get sidetracked, those kinds of things. That's movement. Another one is conflict. It's the idea of contrasting ideas, right? They're in contrast to one another. I won't illustrate that, that's pretty self-explanatory. Suspense. Suspense, we know what suspense is you're withholding something in order to keep our attention, and hopefully you all do this incredibly well in your persuasive speeches. You withheld information from us, withheld your viewpoint from us until the time you wanted to state your proposition, to keep us interested. And then one more will cover life relatedness, or the vital. Life relatedness, or the vital. This is the idea of things that affect us every day, are the things that are a big deal to us. So they affect our reputation, they affect maybe our health, whether we're successful or not, so things that are a big deal to us, things that keep us up late at night. So when you tie maybe your speech to, it affects the economy. So it can cause you to lose your job, or it can make it where you couldn't come back to school. Those are things you really care about. So that's the idea of life relatedness. You're relating it to our life, in essence. All right, Ms. Talbert's going to cover some other stuff.
Really quickly, audience adaptation. When we're adapting to the audience, and so we want to know what their disposition is on a certain topic, there are three things. These are the three things that you tried to find out on your survey. What are they? Knowledge, attitude, and interest. Yeah. So know what those are, and how to apply that. For example, if you knew that your audience was hostile, so you knew that their attitude was they don't agree with you, they don't think you're right, what would be something good to address? So I know I'm giving this speech about that's anti-abortion to a bunch of people who are pro-choice, right? What would be something that I really need to think about addressing in my speech? Okay, their feelings, and not just their feelings, but in general, their objections, which would include their feelings, right? They might say, yeah, but it's not fair because, and so it would include their feelings. But I need to think about, okay, this audience does not agree with me, so every time I have a point, they're going to be saying, oh yeah, but, and I need to be ready to address that, so address the opposing viewpoints. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say to address all of the viewpoints involved, trying to attack the problem from every angle.
Yeah, especially with the audience that we do. Okay, what I'm going to do in the last few minutes is hopefully going to be really helpful to you. So a big chunk of the points at the end of the test are the organizational patterns. And we gave you, I think every one of you did these activities in class. This is almost the same as what's on the final exam. These are the ones that you actually did do in class, so this isn't anything new. But this is the same activity you're going to do on the final exam, where you're going to be given a list of components, and you're going to build an outline out of it. You're going to do one for criteria satisfaction, and you're going to do one for motivated sequence. So what I want to do is, as a way of reviewing this, I want to walk you through a good strategy for how to do this. Because what I don't want to happen is I don't want you to get to the final exam and you look at those last 4 pages and you go, oh my goodness, where do I even start? And it is a little bit intimidating, and you do have to grapple with it. One thing I will tell you is there will be more components than you will actually use. So you have to think, not a bunch more, but there will be a couple more components than you actually use. So you have to think critically about, okay, what actually fits this outline best? So we're going to start with criteria satisfaction, because that's the first one on the test. Oh yeah. walk you through, here's how I would approach this. Yes.
Okay, is it subjective at all, or is there only one right answer?
It is not subjective, there's only one right answer. Except, okay, we did talk about in class.
The A, B's, and C's
Yeah.
can be in different orders. It's the steps that have to be in the right spot. So if you're putting your proposition in the first main point for any organizational pattern, that will be wrong.
Right. So A, B, C, I don't care what order these are in, but they have to be the A, B, and the C. And then this one is going to be only, it has a right answer and a wrong answer. Same thing with main point number 2 and so on. Okay, so first thing, this is criteria satisfaction. So let's say this is what we're working with. It'll be slightly different ones on the final exam. But first thing that I would do, if I were you, is I would say, okay, you know what, in the instructions, I'm telling you, so many people miss points on this. So none of
They
you
do.
in this room will
Makes
miss
us
points on
cry
this.
at night.
It does. Well, whenever we're grading it, we cry.
Yes.
So the first thing it says is make sure you label every step. So you say, aha, I'll do that first. So you go over here and you say, all right, this is criteria satisfaction. So I know that point number 1 is called the what step? Don't be shy. You can do better than that. What is point number 1?
Criteria satisfaction.
The criteria step.
Point number.
So you write that in. And what's point number 2? The satisfaction step. And you say, oh good, I just got 2 free points. Fantastic. Don't want to lose this. All right. So you've already labeled your steps. Now, what I would do is I would look through here and I would look for my proposition. If it's criteria satisfaction, what kind of proposition am I looking for? Value or
Fact.
Value or fact. I know I'm not looking for a policy proposition. So if that's there, I can just say, oops, nope, that's just trying to get me sidetracked. So I'm going to look through here and see if I find something that looks like a value proposition. So mass transportation requires large detention centers. Oh no, not really seeing this. Okay, mass deportation is too expensive. Maybe could be keep or conclusion, probably. Mass deportation will create a humanitarian crisis. Does that sound like a criterion of satisfaction? Satisfaction. Deciding what to do with the illegal immigrant population in the U.S. is complex. What does that sound like to you? That sounds like the criteria step. Yeah. And in fact, that sounds like my main point there, because I'm kind of doing this broad overview of it's complex, and now I'm going to narrow it down and say here's the things that we have to consider. We have to consider what I'm jumping ahead of myself. Trying to decide how much time to take on this. Okay, I'm going to stop on this one. Hopefully that helps. And if you say that's not how I tick, I do it a different way.